Okay. Welcome everyone, I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for watching WION. World is One News. Let's take a look at the big story that we're going to be discussing over the next 60 minutes. Of course, it is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Israel. It is now day 2 there. He's spent almost 24 hours exactly meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as many other dignitaries there as well. A very productive get-together. In fact, he also met with one of the victims of the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. Modi will be in Israel for a 3-day trip, the first time an Indian Prime Minister visiting the state. Now, as part of the diplomacy talks, here are some of the 7 key takeaway points that they've actually discussed. We'll get to that in just a second. All right, so these are the 7 points that they were able to discuss and agree, the 7 agreements between India and Israel. Point number 1. An MOU for setting up the India-Israel Industrial Research and Development as well as Technological Innovation Fund. There's also an MOU for water conservation in India, an MOU on state water utility reform in India, a year work program in agriculture until 2020, a plan of cooperation regarding the cooperation on atomic clocks. There's also an MOU regarding the cooperation in geospatial, the GeoLEP optical link, as well as number 7, which is an MOU regarding a cooperation in some of the electric propulsion for small satellites.
What a great day. The first day of the historic journey. Your visit my friend Prime Minister Modi to Israel. You are making history. We're making history together. This is a deeply moving moment for me, both in personal, but also in national and international terms. Personal, well, I can tell you, I told this to Prime Minister Modi yesterday that almost 30 years ago I went on a date in Tel Aviv in an Indian restaurant and produced 2 fine children. The food was great. So yesterday I asked Rina Pushkarna, who was the owner of that restaurant, to prepare this dinner for this date, and it was equally good. We also had a very moving Israeli singer of Indian origin. She sang a song, Haunting You Beautiful, in Hindu, but also she sang a Hebrew song which Israelis here are familiar with. It's called Anika Ata Nishaneh et Ha'olam. You and I will change the world. I have a feeling that today India and Israel are changing our world and maybe changing parts of the world, because this is a cooperation, it's a marriage really made in heaven, but we're implementing it here on earth. We discussed in our meetings yesterday and today, just now, with several of our ministers and your delegation, we spoke about so many fields where we think we can make a big difference. Big difference in water, in agriculture, in health, in every field, in so many fields, in fields of that affect the lives of our people, their well-being, their employment possibilities, the longevity of their lives, and how they live. So we.
All right, let's introduce tonight's guests as we get into this discussion. We have first up in the studio a journalist and economic analyst, Gautam Mukherjee, here in New Delhi. We also have the former Israeli ambassador, Merkel, joining us live as well. Thank you both for joining us. We'll start with Gautam. First of all, let's talk about these points. It's been about 24 hours since Modi and Netanyahu met. They've had quite a very warm, cordial relationship. These 7 points, let's break down some of those. Where do we see those moving forward? What exactly will they mean?
I think in an overall sense, they mean the modernization of our water management, of agriculture and associated, value chain. This atomic clock one is very interesting because it tends to stop. We've been buying them outright from Germany mostly, and they're up in a satellite and then they stop. they shouldn't. They're meant to last forever.
Right.
So if the Israelis have a more durable atomic clock, it will certainly help satellites operate better in space. Then there is the lack of visibility, but I think a very, very deep and wide security relationship developing, which is likely to set up it's not in the 7 MOUs,
right?
But it is in the general remarks, in the joint statements, in terms of emphasis on terror, convergence of views on terror, which I think what we need very badly if we're going to make in India, and with Israel agreeing to help us make in India, is an ecosystem. For example, if you bring in an F-16 from America, only 40% of it is actually made in America. 60% are made by various other people, components,
right,
all
elsewhere.
over Europe and so on. So you need to set up an ecosystem in order to make in India, especially in the defense area. And because of Israel's very developed aeronautical manufacturing base, research and development, very, very strong in that, innovation, very strong in that, I think we are going to be able to grow to the level of sophistication we need.
So more of a modernized approach, sort of the takeaways.
Across the board. Everything,
when
they talk of deep and wide, and they also talk of going to Africa together, where we already have a presence, Israel has a very minimal presence. The idea is that there will be a lot of technological cooperation from their side,
right,
and a lot of marketing, market access from our side.
All right, let's bring in our other guest as well. We have Aaron Merkel joining us now. Thank you so much. We appreciate your insights. What do you make of the seven agreements, the deals between Israel and India?
Well, first of all, I think we have to understand that we see in this visit a very large, a huge compliment of the State of Israel. At the end of the day, we are talking about India with 1.3 billion people, and with Israel with 8 million people, which is probably not a very large city in India with that number. And Prime Minister Modi says clearly that he needs Israel if he wants to achieve many of his goals as Prime Minister. So first of all, it's a very significant compliment to the State of Israel, especially as India has not been, for most of our existence, has not been very favorable to Israel, but rather friendly to our Arab adversaries. Now, having said that, we are very happy that the Prime Minister arrived and is spending a significant amount of time here, and we can see the friendship between the two Prime Ministers. I think as my predecessor has just said,
right,
the 7 agreements, they signify the kind of cooperation that will exist, which is really mostly using our high-tech in order to perhaps cooperate with the Indian government or Indian companies. Because we had no choice, having no natural resources to speak of, we were lucky to be able to develop a very advanced high-tech industry. And this is what we have to provide. And since India is interested, we see this as a very important point.
All right, let me bring Gautam back into the conversation. We'll also be playing those 7 points on the screen throughout our discussion. Just for a background, why do you think terrorism, though, wasn't flat out addressed in those dealings? I mean, we know that India certainly wanted to perhaps adapt that and perhaps gain that from Israel. Why wasn't it flat out listed there? Are you surprised?
No, I'm not. I'm glad in a way that it wasn't, because it is really something that is always put on the table by India wherever it goes. And most countries accept that something has to be done about it. That Israel and India are particularly sympathetic to each other on this is obvious, because Israel has faced it from the year that they were born, and we have certainly experienced it ever since Pakistan developed its policy of 1,000 cuts. And more so now because of a sort of a triumvirate of bullies in our neighborhood between North Korea, Pakistan, and China. So we, and tonally they're much the same, with threats and aggressive actions and land grabs and so forth. So it is actually a way of controlling, on the one hand, the non-state actor type of terrorism. Right. But it is also deeper than that. It is about state terrorism, where it's used as an instrument of policy to intimidate. And I think here again, Israel is familiar with this, being surrounded on all sides with hostile neighbors for many years who have converted into appreciating Israel's presence now in the main. So not only do they have allies amongst the Arab world, they have now developed a very overt and happy alliance with India.
All right, let me bring Air back in as well. Air, let me ask you that question as well. How surprised are you? Israel certainly always sees eye to eye when it comes to dealing with anti-terror, perhaps not always in line with other things when we see parliamentary discussions. But in terms of this, why is terrorism not part of the agreement, perhaps separately? Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I think that there's a lot more to this visit than meets the eye. Those agreements are those subjects that are easy to announce publicly and are not problematic. But I'm sure that the other issues such as defense, or actually Prime Minister Netanyahu did say publicly that we intend to cooperate fighting terror. He did say that. So I'm not surprised. It is customary in such situations to leave some things under the table, and then they will be carried out by the experts from both countries.
All right, we'll come back to the discussion in just a minute, but I also want to get some more perspective on what all has happened just in the past few hours, bringing our viewers up to speed. Well, peace, dialogue, and restraint, but seldom has peace been secured without developing the military and economic might. Thus, India and Israel deciding to develop the strategic partnership. Both countries have been targeted by terrorism from various aspects, homegrown as well as external forces. They have decided to combat the menace together. So when Prime Minister Modi met with Mumbai attack survivor Moshe Holzberg, it was a message to those who plot India's downfall that, look, here's a survivor, not a victim, and he lives and prospers while we come after you. India's ambitions are clear: prosperity for Indians and a say in global affairs. So one shouldn't miss the point when Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talks about improving the lives of the people of Africa while still partnering with India. Longevity of lives and improved economic and employment opportunities. That's what India and Israel can achieve together. And to that end, India and Israel, as we mentioned, signing 7 agreements, MOUs as well. Prime Minister Netanyahu has also accepted the Prime Minister's visit to India. So eye for eye, that sort of seems to be the India for Israel, Israel for India, a strong working partnership between the two world powers. Let's get back and focus in specifically on terrorism before we move on to the next point. I'll bring in Gautam back in. Terrorism on the web, but what about terrorism on the ground? Are there any other type of joint exercises foreseen? How exactly do you predict that this will, going forward? How exactly are they going to work together to combat terror?
Well, one of the things that I think will be under the radar but forthcoming will be armed drones. Second will be training across the board. Third will be surveillance. Fourth will be small arms. Israel makes some of the best light machine guns and handguns in the world.
Right.
And I think there will be a joint venture factory coming in quite soon in India to make these things, because we need millions of these guns,
right,
and we have not been able to zero in on appropriate ones. Israel has a tried and tested set, a whole array of such small arms. In terms of some of the other heavier duty things, for example, if we do go through with the F-16 deal
Right.
with Lockheed and bring it to India,
Right.
the Israelis took that same F-16 years ago and re-engineered it to cope with any aircraft many levels more advanced than the F-16 because of what they put into it. Now, if they help us set up our own aerospace industry over here, which I fully expect them to,
Right.
I think some of these things will be forthcoming. The generosity that has been displayed by Israel and the fact that their governmental systems seem to be much more, direct and able to react and able to decide than perhaps America, which has many checks and balances,
Right.
and is very ponderous and takes a long time to basically look at what was a former Soviet ally into an American ally, because there's been so many things that have locked us out for 20, 30, 40 years with America, that to bring those into play now on a different most favored nation basis,
Right.
is difficult. Whereas in Israel, they have always reacted when we needed them in a security context, favorably, immediately, and usefully, not in any peripheral sense, but very directly. They gave us ammunition, they gave us howitzers, they gave us all sorts of things which we needed right then and there.
A strong support in
when
terms
we
of
were
how
in
to
the middle
combat
of
and
a
deal with
fight.
that. Right.
Now, when we were in the middle of a fight, if they could supply things, it demonstrates that all along the Israeli establishment is able to decide and act, which is not true of very many countries, including, to a large extent, India.
All right.
Which is also very ponderous.
All right, let me bring in our senior foreign editor joining us in the WION newsroom right now, Padma Rao. Padma, thanks for joining us tonight. Let's talk about the zero tolerance, the zero policy when it comes to Israel and dealing with terrorism. How surprised are you that it wasn't listed in the agreements, these 7 agreements, as India and Israel sort of continue to build that relationship stronger? There was everything else about technology and the agricultural aspect, but terrorism noticeably being left out.
Well, there might be a reason for that because terrorism is, it's evolving, it's developing, it's taking on all kinds of multi-headed hydral shapes. So maybe it's one of those subjects on which you cannot sign a memorandum of understanding and lay down, points that are to be achieved within so many months or years, because I think it's a more dynamic subject which will evolve as it develops and as attacks, unfortunately, do take place around the world. Having said that, Archit, I think the zero tolerance policy, it's an admirable policy, but the social fabric of Israel and India, the social fabrics are very different. Even though we have a government in the majority in Parliament, which might make it easier to pass certain things, just the social fabric alone, we're speaking of a country with a near 100%, almost 100% majority population of one particular religion in Israel, whereas in India, we are more diversified than that. So to be able to put that, for a zero tolerance policy, you have to have parliamentary consensus to start with. And Israel has always had that as far as terrorism is concerned,
right.
Irrespective of which party was in power. Now, even if we have the majority for one particular party in India, it's going to be a lot tougher to change or to introduce new legislation which will allow that kind of policy to be implemented.
All right, one of the other things that was actually very interesting when it comes to some of these agreements was certainly about the the water or the agricultural aspect. So India is certainly benefiting a lot, getting a lot of information from Israel. Let me bring Air back into the conversation. What exactly is Israel benefiting? India is certainly getting a lot of information on perhaps how to treat its wastewater plants, how to reuse some of the agricultural facilities, the desalination, how to conserve water, but let's go back on the Israel side. Why is there so much of a vested interest? What's in it for them?
Well, from an Israeli point of view, this relationship with India is highly important. There are many countries that are trying to isolate us, to boycott us, and so on. And having such a friend, such as India, such an important power in the world, is that also other adversaries here in the area, when we see that these are our friends, they will think twice and 3 times and 5 times before they start anything. So we see this as a very important step in our efforts to increase our international legitimacy and to fight various efforts against us. I want to make a comment about what my predecessor just said. Israel is not as monolithic as it may sound. About 20% of our citizens are Muslims, Muslim Arabs, and only about 80% are Jews. So these Arab citizens are full citizens like anybody else. Remember that we are not monolithic.
All right. Gautam, let me bring you into the discussion as well. You know, what is it in it for Israel? I mean, the fact that this is a knowledge sharing, India gaining a lot of access when it comes to technology, startups, perhaps even terror, certainly agriculture. Is this Israel perhaps trying to develop a better friendship, given that it doesn't particularly have a lot of friends?
No. They're getting access to a huge market.
A big market.
Much of this will be joint venturing.
Right.
So both sides will gain massively. There's only so many things they can do with their population of 8 million people and what is really, after all is said and done, a very small country.
Right.
A very powerful country, but a very small one. So now they come into India where we have almost enough of a backed up need for them to service for the next 3 decades. Almost anybody who comes in on a vital infrastructural sort of basis, as Israel has indicated its willingness to do now in water, in agriculture. Now, agriculture, we want to double farm income by 2022. We're not going to do it with, biblical methods, which is what we are used to.
Right.
We have 60% of our population producing the food. Yes, we manage to feed ourselves and have a surplus, but we don't know how to store it. We don't know how to move it. We don't know how to take it to market. We don't know how to have a cold chain. We don't have food processing. All this is something that Israel can do. Yes, they have the technology, but it is always applied. And when it is applied, it means money.
All right.
And therefore, a market. Not only that, as my predecessor just said, legitimacy. When we go to Africa, which is something that Mr. Netanyahu highlighted, we're going with Israel. Israel isn't in Africa right now, but it comes in as a partner of India and a partner of various African countries. It spreads its wings like any worthwhile country does when it has something to offer.
That's something to offer. All right, let me bring Padma Rao back into the conversation. Padma, does this sort of perhaps put Israel at a higher level, at a higher benchmark than perhaps India? If they're offering so much, in terms of technology and agriculture and the water treatment and all that, I mean, can we say, is it fair to say that, perhaps they are giving more to India, but India has more of a population, so there's a vested interest for them to work with India, perhaps because Israel doesn't have as many supporters?
Well, two things. One is that, yes, certainly it seems more of a take on part of India than a give. But that's only the surface of it, because what any country that is doing business with India today is actually after or interested in is this giant consumer market. Now, Israel has excellent products in almost every field. I speak specifically of their defense products. And coming to that subject, Archit, the interesting thing is that even without diplomatic ties to many countries in the world, Israeli defense companies have successfully managed to sell weapons. Sometimes they're routed through third countries. The deals are made in such a complicated way that ultimately, these weapons make their way to the buyers.
Right.
So it's not just weapons. There are, various other things. They're the masters of apps, as they're called. They've offered to help us with, digital technology in the health sector, for instance. And now that combined with the Aadhaar card, which has been sort of bumbling its way through in the past years, that might be a boost to implementing this Aadhaar scheme in a proper way, and also ensuring that millions of people who have no access to a centralized health scheme actually can have one now. The question, of course, is how much, how much time it's going to take. And to your very last question as to what's in it for Israel, well, there is the giant, 1.2 billion man consumer market, and also, as Gautam pointed out, the opportunity to ride piggyback with India in other ventures in other continents, like in Africa, where India has massive investments and is planning more. So it is a win-win for both sides, I feel.
Absolutely. And let's also forget about the painting that Modi has gifted Netanyahu. That is also something that they do have now. So it's not all good. There is some take as well. Let's, sort of switching gears on a little bit of on this discussion. I also want to bring in the topic of baby Moshe. No longer, of course, a baby just yet, but in this exclusive interview with our sister channel, news that Moshe Helsberg speaks out about his love for India. Of course, he was an infant during the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. Let's listen into that conversation.
Moshe हिंदी तो खैर नहीं जानता होगा, आपके साथ रहते हुए कुछ सिखाई हिंदी?
नहीं, एक से 10 तक उसको आता है.
हिंदी आती है?
I don't know Hindi.
But you know number, no?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
चलिए, हिंदुस्तान की एक चीज मोशे के पास है जो आपने बहुत अच्छी सिखा दी, लेकिन क्या मोशे के दिमाग में?
मैंने नहीं सिखाया, उसका मम्मी ने सिखाया ये.
To Prime Minister Modi, do you want to say something?
I love him.
You love him. And you want to go to India?
Yes.
Why?
I want.
Because this is you have.
Because this is my home.
You want to visit Nariman house?
Yes.
Anything? Why? Why do you want to go there?
That is my Chabad.
This is my house.
This is my Chabad house.
Moshe ever asked you about that incident happened in Mumbai about 2016?
But I think so when it's more a little big, when after 13 years, Moshe boy going to visit to the place to Mumbai, and you were going to visit to the Nariman house, because the Nariman house, this is a house for Moshe, because this is the house from the parents for Moshe. And now you have some people, some Chabad people, what Lubavitch, what now watch the place in the middle time when Moshe boy very big. And now after 2 years, Moshe boy coming to India, to the Nariman house to visit. I think so. When you have maybe 18 years, 20 years, then Moshe boy go back just to India and to live to India, live to Mumbai, and live in the Nariman house. And you have the rabbi, the chief rabbi of Lubavitch in Mumbai.
Tell me something about Moshe as a student, his performance.
Moshe Baruch Hashem fine is a very good boy. Play, she very like it. She very like it football. Very like it tennis. Everything like it. Make everything good. Like it. Every boy.
And what is his future plan?
The plans when he big, he will be a rabbi also.
Anything that he wants to become an army person?
Yeah.
Business. What is this?
Not business. No, just a rabbi. A rabbi the same with the father. A rabbi in doing everything good for everybody, peoples. The same.
Sad story indeed. Well, as Prime Minister Modi visits Israel, the first time ever by an Indian Prime Minister to that nation, we also bring you that story, the story that we just saw. Baby Moshe was just a toddler at that point, a little child, when his parents were killed during the Mumbai terror attacks back in 2008. Here's a recap.
Mention the words Chabad house in India, and chances are that many Indians wouldn't know the way to one. Those who do would probably connect the name to terror. the 26/11 terror attacks that saw Mumbai's Chabad house becoming one of the targets. Welcome to Paharganj in the heart of Delhi. Here, everyone knows what the Chabad house is, and someone will actually escort you to the 3-storied building hidden in a maze of streets and by-lanes. Chabad house in Paharganj, the first semblance of a home away from home for hundreds of Israelis landing in India. The presence of a Delhi police constable right at the entrance of Delhi's Chabad house is a signal enough that from the security point of view, this is an important venue. The scene on the first floor is baffling. With backpacks and luggage littered across the entire floor, a clutch of young Israelis hang out. Some relaxing on the floor, others downing a cold drink, yet others charging their phones and laptops. Chaya Mushka, the wife of Rabbi Akiva, who's in charge of this Chabad house, explains to us what a Chabad house is and what it means for those visiting it.
So the Chabad house is an open Jewish house that is like open home that every Jew and that can come, feel home. Our mission in life to love every Jew. It's not matter how he looks, from where he comes from.
The Chabad house is probably the first point of contact with their own people for Israelis visiting India. It's a comfort zone that allows them some familiarity before venturing out to explore exotic, bewildering India. Ask any of these youngsters why they chose India, and given India's famously popular anarchy, the answer is unsurprising. A long holiday in India has almost become a formal ritual after the rigorous and compulsory military training that all Israeli youth undergo after completing their studies.
I came for 2 months, and I finished the army, and everybody when you finish the army in Israel, they come to India or like Thailand or stuff because we need to relax and we need to see something that we didn't see in Israel, and it's special, it's another style of living.
But it's not that only Israeli youth visit India. Pensioners like Shaike too are among those who like to come.
I think India is a very, very interesting country. There are many kinds of face to India. The south is something else and the north is something else. And the people are very kind. They like to help and ask you everything. If you want help, if you need something, it's something amazing.
Then there are those who have been to India before and have chosen to come back because of something else India is famous for.
We really love here. It's really nice. We can travel for 6 months here. We cross India from the south to the north, and we love the life here.
Israelis swarm Paharganj and the area around Chabad house. That shows just how comfortable they feel here. Here there are shops with signs in Hebrew, and what's more, many shopkeepers address them quite fluently in their own tongue. Expectedly, business is booming here.
I've been dealing with them since 12 years. So yes, I speak a little bit Hebrew and all. They come, they have heard about my shop and all, so they come and buy here, and I'll speak to them in Hebrew, and it's like quite, it creates a friendly environmental thing, you know, like while you're in the shop, you know, to make them feel comfortable and make them feel home. And it's fun to work with them. מה את חושבת על הודו, וכמה זמן בזבזת פה, וחיה, וזה, כל מיני שטויות?
Rabbi Akiva, the man in charge of Delhi's Chabad house, has been here for 6 years now and is very upbeat about the ties Israel shares with India and why so many Israelis come to India.
India is very a spiritual place, and they are coming to look for it, and India is the best place to do it from all over Asia and all over the world. So India, I think, exactly what they are looking for.
The symbolism of Prime Minister Modi's meeting with 10-year-old Moshe is not lost on Rabbi Akiva. Moshe was but a baby when his parents were killed in the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, and his nanny fled with him in her arms.
Not just because of high-tech or different things. As we can see, that the Indian government help us with the security, and that that Modi is going to visit and meet Moshe. It shows us that really India and Israel, they are very connected, and really everyone wants to help the other one.
Shalom, namaste. Namaste.
Shalom or namaste, falafel or firni, whichever it might be, Israelis arriving in India in droves live and love India with a passion, with occasional visits to Chabad houses whenever homesickness comes over them. In New Delhi with video journalist Kapil Kumar, Raghavendra Rao, WION.
All right, I want to go back to the discussion with our guests. Let me bring in Padma Rao again. Padma, you know, there's certainly a huge Israeli population here. We saw that tragic report. We also saw a short while ago Prime Minister Modi meeting with Moshe, no longer a baby anymore, almost a decade since that attack. What does this signify symbolically in terms of how confident India is in making sure that it will not highlight, you know, just the victims, but also showcase the survivors?
You put it rightly, Archit. The tragedy is that there are thousands of children being killed every day in conflicts around the world. Many of them are, children who are dying in conflicts specifically over religions. So Moshe happens to be one of them. And certainly, you know, the circumstances under which his parents died and how his nanny took him away, and you know, that is a trauma that will live with him for a long time. The only thing that makes me, as a mother, a little uncomfortable perhaps is, but that's a personal thing, is to see so much of a spotlight and a limelight on a normal 10-year-old, who may just wish to go out and play football or do something else. But having said that, he's obviously, still in the loving care of his grandparents, and his nanny still visits him. So yes, certainly they had him well prepared for this visit, and he seems like a cheerful, normal, happy child from the visuals we saw, which is a great relief for all the citizens of India who were horrified by that tragedy, as with several other tragedies during the 26/11 attacks. But specifically, Moshe, his parents dying, he became a symbol also because of his tender age. He was but a toddler at that, and that's when all this happened. I'd just like to come back to the other story that we aired just now about why Israelis come to India in droves after their army service. There's an interesting fact about Israeli society, Archit. There are the Ashkenazim Jews and the Sephardic Jews. The Ashkenazim Jews are mostly from Russia and from the so-called Caucasian countries, and the Sephardic Jews are usually from the Middle East, from Iraq and from Iran. Now there are obviously, and that is, they both have contributed immensely to what Israeli culture and Israeli food is today.
Right.
So that is, I think, one of the reasons that multiculturalism of India that seems to appeal to Israelis, because it's a place where, whether you're Ashkenazi or whether you're Sephardic, you always find something that reminds you of home, whether it's the food or whether it's just the mix of people that are here in India and that India comprises of.
Absolutely, and we also brought in a guest earlier on talking about perhaps any of them here have faced any kind of discrimination or anti-Semitism, and the answer was in fact no. They were in fact curious to find out more about their culture, and it was almost a starting point. So certainly nice to see that perspective. I also want to bring into this point another guest, a former diplomat and political strategist from Jerusalem joining us. We have Lior Weintraub joining us. Thank you so much. We appreciate your insights. I wanted to ask you really quickly in terms of the sentiment there on how Modi's visit is sort of making waves and headlines. How surprised are you? I mean, is this as big of a deal in Israel as it's being covered here in India wall to wall? Lior, go ahead.
I'm not surprised at all. To be completely honest, during my time in India, we kept on reiterating to our Indian counterpart that Israelis admire the Indian culture, civilization, and the relation has a long way and a great potential to keep on growing. So I'm not surprised at all. You know, one of my problems as a diplomat on my vacation at home was to carry so many CDs with Bollywood movies and Indian music and Indian clothes and books to my friends that were eager to enjoy some Indian culture. So the emotion here toward India, you know, for many years now is, you know, tremendous. Is very warm, and this is just an opportunity to show to express them and to highlight the great relationship on the people-to-people level, on the cultural level, on the strategic level, of course. And you just showed Moishik was, I think, kind of you know, is just a kid, as was said just a few moments ago, but it also shows that we have not just a shared future, but also a shared faith in many ways. And some of the people who wish harm to the Indian people are the same people who wish harm to the Israeli people.
Certainly, you know, a lot of similarities. There's certainly a strong, fruitful relationship brewing. Let's also add in some flavor. What has all happened so far in the last 24 hours? Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his wife, they hosted Prime Minister Modi last night. This was a private dinner at their residence in Jerusalem. Prime Minister Modi was at there for about 3 hours, in fact, as the entire Netanyahu family there greeted him with utmost warmth. There was also interaction that went on till almost midnight. Prime Minister Netanyahu also gifting him a painting that depicts a successful charge of the Indian Cavalry Brigade, which depicts the liberation of Haifa back in 1918 during World War I. Also, Padma, you know, we saw that warmth there being rolled out. You know, we saw how all of that, you know, laid out. This type of an honor is really never typically greeted, perhaps for the Pope, perhaps for the U.S. President. But in terms of India and Israel, certainly that sentiment, that bond growing stronger. What do you make of that? All right, we'll get to, we'll see if we can get her back in. Let me bring in our other guest. We have Air joining us as well. What do you make of that, you know, that cordiality between, you know, this red carpet treatment, which is really typically unusual?
Well, it's not unusual in this case. Quite frankly, I think the Israelis were quite surprised to see how close this relationship has become. We have had now diplomatic relations for 25 years.
Right.
But we've never had a visit an Indian prime minister. So I think there's genuine appreciation of his move. And besides, as was said before, almost every Israeli, by the time they finish their 3 years of compulsory military service, they need to go out and feel free, and this they've learned to do in India. So many Israelis here have visited India. Sometimes they stay for months, many months, even years, and they are all. So I think it's natural that this is the reception. I'm not surprised. As I said before, you know, even in this broadcast, you, the other, the guests are speaking about India and Israel as two equals that can benefit from each other, and all this is true. But we really should remember Israel is a small, very small country, the smallest country there is in the Middle East, and getting such a relationship for us and being able even to help or to attract markets in India, etc., is a very huge compliment for ourselves, and it's natural that we receive like that the Prime Minister.
All right, certainly a warm reception there indeed. Well, Prime Minister Modi will visit the cemetery there in Haifa to pay homage to the Indian soldiers who died in the First World War. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will also accompany Modi for the wreath-laying ceremony at Haifa Cemetery. In India, the Indian Army celebrates Haifa Day on the 23rd of September to commemorate the Indian soldiers martyred during the battle for the liberation of Haifa. The Mysore Lancers also played a crucial role in winning the Battle of Haifa for the Allied powers from the Ottoman Empire. All right, so we've talked about a few things. We talked about terrorism. We talked about the similarities, the cultural angle. Let's also now focus in on the media aspect of this, how it is being perhaps covered in Israel. Prime Minister Modi's visit has certainly been widely covered here in India and even in Israel. And Israel is looking to befriend powerful nations. India is growing in stature day by day, both military-wise as well as economic-wise. Well, Israel's longest-running paper, the Haaretz, called Indian Prime Minister a superstar. The Jerusalem Post praised India for its democracy and culture. The Times of Israel called this visit historic. While the Israel WION carried a piece penned by Modi and Netanyahu, the buzz is certainly visible and there is excitement in the air. All right, at this point, I also want to bring in our web editor. We have WION's web editor joining us from the newsroom. We have Anuradha Mukherjee standing by. Anuradha, thanks for joining us on this. What are some of the big headlines when it comes to this on Modi's visit? Certainly getting coverage on television here in India and Israel.
Yeah, Archit, the kind of coverage we're looking at here, apart from the regular, the official agreements and deals that are being signed, are really the people-to-people contact stories that are getting a lot of, I would say, hits on our website at least. The fact that India and Israel have been, it has had these people-to-people contacts for decades now. And this visit by Prime Minister Modi to Israel, which is actually the first visit in 70 years by any Indian Prime Minister, sort of puts a official, sanction, so to say, on the relationship which has existed for many years. Now, the kind of headlines that are actually, you doing well, or you'll see people are really interested in, are actually the stories about the human element, the historical links between Israel and India. As we know that, people from Israel, especially the youngsters, they usually come to India for what they call their deep chill sessions after the compulsory army training that they undergo. So, those kind of stories where, we're looking at the popular culture in Delhi, in the markets of Old Delhi, in Paharganj especially, where a lot of these young Israeli tourists come and stay in relatively inexpensive guest houses, the kind of shopping they do. So there are these, corners of Delhi and indeed India that have completely changed according to the, the Israeli population which comes there either as guests. Some of them have actually settled in these places. Like, for instance, there is a small village at the base of, the Binsar Reserve Forest in Uttarakhand, where actually we have Israelis staying there, and people want to hear about these stories. People want to, for instance, Prime Minister Modi is going to Haifa tomorrow, and that's another historic link with Israel. Because 41 of our soldiers died there while serving in the First World War. So these are the kind of stories I think people are really interested in hearing about.
All right, we'll come back to you in just a moment. I also want to bring in our guests who are there in Israel to get a perspective on what is it like there on the ground. Let's bring in Lior Weintraub, former diplomat and political strategist. How is the media coverage there in Jerusalem, Lior? Lior, if you can hear us, the political coverage, the media coverage there in Israel, how is it there on the ground for the Modi and Netanyahu meet? All right, Lior, unfortunately, we might have lost connection. Let's go over to Air joining us as well there in Israel. What's the media coverage been like there?
The media coverage is quite large. There were at least 2 Israeli journalists that went to Delhi just prior to the visit. A correspondent for Channel 2 News, which is the most respected or anyway largest news service in Israel. He had an interview with the Prime Minister, a long interview, some 40 minutes. And then the editor of the one of the papers, which is actually a very popular paper called Israel WION, which means Israel Today, he also went to India and he interviewed the Prime Minister. So all this was broadcast and published before the visit and already created the atmosphere. Today, certainly, this is the #1 topic in the news. So I think, by and large, this visit is getting a lot of attention here.
Those are live visuals there of Prime Minister Narendra Modi there in Israel, meeting with some of the opposition leaders this hour and meeting with some of the members of the Indian Israeli community later on this evening in a few hours. They're 2.5 hours behind India time there. So shortly around 5 o'clock their local time. Let me bring in Gautam back in. You've been patiently waiting as we sort of juggled a lot of topics over this past hour, talked about terrorism, talked about culture, now the media coverage. I'm just looking online, the the Times of Israel, the Post. Certainly a lot is being addressed about this historic visit. What do you make of that? Are you surprised by that? Or do you think this is just natural, to the fact that this is what they want? This is what Israel wants in terms of building that strong relationship with India. So it is garnering, a huge amount of coverage, because in the U.S. last week we were there, we didn't see barely any coverage when Modi was there. Sort of a complete opposite here in Israel.
Well, in terms of natural allies,
right?
The U.S., Israel, and India are natural allies. Now, in the U.S., because they've always been kind of insular, they, take all of this into their stride. They know more about China because they buy and sell to China a lot more than they do with us.
Right.
And we weren't really on the general map, except lately when the Indian diaspora is starting to make some kind of impact over the last few years. Now, in Israel, Israel's in our neighborhood. They're 2 hours away in terms of time difference, which tells you a very different story from night and day, which is how far America is from India in terms of distance. Now, with this is a relationship that theoretically should have happened many, many years ago.
Right.
But it didn't, for one reason or the other. Israel had to earn its spurs in a very, very difficult environment, and it has done so. India has worked through its socialism and its, being part of the Soviet bloc and being pro-Arab to a substantial tilt,
right,
to this point where we are much more confident as a nation. We've started growing, in fact, exactly for the years that we have been we've been fully with full diplomatic relations with Israel. Prime Minister Rao put it in. Narasimha Rao put it in 1991-2.
Okay.
And that's when we liberalized, and that's when India started to grow. And now 25 years later, it's a different kind of India from the one that went pre-1991. That's one. But one thing that I want to touch upon that nobody has really talked about so far is covert activity, covert intelligence. Mossad is, nobody talks about what Mossad does because they're so good at it. Mossad can teach us a lot. We do not have any real external covert activity arm anymore, ever since Prime Minister Desai kind of pulled it apart.
Right.
Ever since that happened, RAW's been sort of a toothless tiger of sorts. They shuffle files. Now we need to go from there. Now with Ajit Doval, who is a very potent force in this government, I think it is time to, again, that's another place where we can dovetail together with the Israelis.
Right.
And develop some kind of very necessary capacity in this area. Anti-insurgency. Now, the Maoists, we are always talking about Pakistani terrorists, but the Maoists are quite a menace, and they are also supported from outside. Insurgencies in the northeast of the country, bordering Myanmar and so on. We are good, but not good enough to tackle all this because we haven't really developed the kind of differentiation between a regular army and this kind of guerrilla warfare, etc.
All right.
So all of this is something we learn from Israel.
Lots to learn, lots to sort of endure and perhaps bring back home to the table. We've talked about a lot of different things tonight. We certainly want to thank all of our guests for sharing in their perspectives and their time, of course. We talked about technology, terrorism. We've also, of course, talked about culture. The one thing that we didn't actually get to was, in fact, about food. Food is something that everybody always enjoys, so we're going to leave you with this. This is what Prime Minister Modi will be eating shortly in a few hours, as many of you are enjoying your dinner. It'll be a taste close to home. WION is on the ground there in Israel. In fact, we talked to Reena Pushkarna, who is preparing some tasty home foods. Let's see what's on the menu tonight for Prime Minister Modi. With that, we're going to leave it. Good night.
So this is the kitchen, a famous kitchen which is cooking for the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and I have with us Reena Pushkarna, very famous Indian of Israel, someone who introduced food and tandoori chain of restaurants, if I'm not wrong, to the state of Israel. She's cooking all those beautiful vegetables for the Prime Minister. She went and shopped today, and look at the way everyone is cooking for the PM, though, well, you know, I am not asked them as to what they will be cooking.
Adrak ki chai.
Adrak ki chai? This adrak ki chai will be introduced.
No, it's already.
It has already been introduced?
Since yesterday.
It's going since yesterday?
We have to have fresh adrak all
So
the time.
every day she goes out, every day she cooks, and this is that little snippet, this is little exclusive.
Sorry, nobody's allowed to shoot it.
little exclusive for our viewers, for ZTV network, for WION, so that they can have an idea for DNA that this is where the Prime Minister's food is being cooked, and this is what he's going to eat through today. I'm Kartikeya Sharma from this little kitchen of the Prime Minister, and it is here that the brass tacks is taking place, and we will also show you an interview of Reena Pushkarna in great detail in some time from now.